Welcome to the Great Broker Podcast. I'm your host, David Houck. In each episode, I talk with elite commercial real estate brokers about the deals, decisions, and lessons that define a great career in brokerage. Real brokers, real stories. Let's go. I'm excited about today's episode because we are broadcasting today from the shores of the Chesapeake Bay all the way across the country to the shores of the San Francisco Bay. My guest today is Mark McGranahan, principal at Avison Young. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I always like to do introductions at the beginning. Mark is a principal in the San Fran office of AY. Longtime San Francisco broker, over 30 years in the business, was a vice chairman at Cushman and Wakefield. He moved to AY in 2021. What's interesting is Mark has an unusually strong academic background. Went to SC and studied accounting. And then he got a law degree from USC. How about that? He even is a professor, an adjunct professor for UC Berkeley's School of Business. He's got over 8 million square feet of transactions over his career. Is probably a bigger number than that. When he was at Cushman, he was the top producer in the San Francisco office about 10 times. And of course, there's a little volatility in the San Francisco market. So Mark has survived the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID pandemic in 2000, and he's still rocking. And in terms of his clients, Mark does tenant rep and he does agency leasing. And like all of our guests, it's a pretty good list of clients. Big banks, as you would expect in San Francisco, B of A, Blackstone, Lazard, global name brand law firms, O'Melveny, Deckert, Paul Hastings, in addition to tech companies. And on the landlord side, that's a pretty good name brand list too. If you like people such as Boston Properties or Kilroy or Jamestown. Mark, is there any other thing I can say about you?
Well, clearly I'm overqualified for this business and old. So you've made me feel a bit inadequate in the sense that I should have retired and been like you, a podcaster. I don't know why I'm still doing this, but here I am.
Okay. So, Mark, with all of that educational background, how did you become a commercial real estate broker?
Well, that's a great question. What ChatGPT doesn't do is tell you a little bit deeper. And I started in this business because my mother was a commercial property manager. So, in essence, I grew up in real estate and I started working when I was in high school. When I was 16 as a property management accountant for the company that she worked for. And that was really my exposure to commercial real estate. And then coming from, I would say, more of a blue collar background, the idea of becoming an accountant was very exciting. And I was going to work for a company called Kenneth Leventhal, which doesn't exist anymore, but back in the day was the biggest real estate accounting firm. And the person who I worked for at this company, Edward Ellis, a real estate developer in LA, he had that background. And then I determined that, you know what, the accountants kind of clean up the information. If you're a real estate lawyer, you're much more closer to the actual deal and you got paid more, which is hence why I went to law school. And at the time, there was big firms in LA where I grew up, Greenberg Glusker and Cox Castle Nicholson. Then it determined that, oh my God, I saw John Cushman, and it's really the broker that did the deal, and it was the attorney who papered the deal, and then it was the accountant that kind of cleaned it up after the fact. So that was my long-winded answer to that's how I became a broker. Is I want to get closer to the transactions, and that was my entree into it.
How did you meet John Cushman?
Well, it was interesting. Back in the day, he was very active in giving a lot of speeches. So if you were ever involved in BOMA or any of those organizations like my mother was, I would sometimes go to those big events and John Cushman would be the featured speaker. And at the time, he was a larger than life figure in downtown Los Angeles or all over Los Angeles for that matter. And I got really attracted to that. by happenstance, when I was in accounting school at USC, one of my best friends, his friend from high school, worked for John Cushman. And that was my entree when I got to law school to stay in contact with him. And then I started actually as an intern in the mid 80s when I was in law school working for John Cushman at Cushman Realty before it became Cushman Awake.
Do you consider John to be one of your mentors in the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a mentor as well as an idol, somebody that aspirationally you would like to be, for people that are listening to this that are a little bit younger, I don't think they understand at the time, tenant rep in the 80s was just in its early stages, right? So you had
Mhm.
Julian Studley, which then became Studley Company, right? Eddie Gordon, who then became CBRE, John Cushman, these mythical, bigger than life figures that were doing these gigantic transactions. It was very exciting. And so, yes, it was very aspirational to have an opportunity to work for somebody like him as an idol, as well as, ultimately over time became a mentor. Had a very close relationship, but it took a long time to get there. I'll digress for a second. I remember one of the few opportunities as a young person was once John's used to have a chauffeur driven limousine, which was part of his shtick. And one time it was being serviced, so somebody had to volunteer to take him somewhere. So I was stuck in the car for an hour driving John from downtown LA to Century City. And that was kind of my opportunity to see him up close and personal and to hear him on the phone for an hour because he never gets off the
A similar experience, you left out another tenant rep, pioneer, football player, number 12, Roger Staubach.
Yeah, 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 for sure. I mean, there was a whole bunch of them. I
Yeah,
didn't I didn't mean to
back in
exclude anybody, but I
yeah, that's alright. Well, back in the day, when Roger, flew into DC, he didn't have a chauffeur-driven limousine, but someone would always pick him up from the airport and bring him, to our office, and I was the new guy, so I got my car washed twice that
there you
morning.
go.
Before I picked up Roger, I was right on time, and, I was nervous as a cat the first time I met him,
Yeah, you don't know
and
what to say to a person like that, right? And
yeah.
basically at some point you're just absorbing it, which is part of, being a young person trying to, get your feet on the ground to then build to something.
What do you think made John Cushman such a great commercial real estate broker?
I think it's a combination of a couple things. First and foremost, nobody worked harder than John Cushman. That guy literally worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's
Mhm,
a lot of John Cushman isms around. And one of them is the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I think he took
mhm.
that to heart. And notwithstanding all his success and wealth, up until the end, he was still working extremely hard. I think secondly, he really understood the human element of it, which is it's still a people business. And he found a way to connect the dots to the right decision makers like nobody I've ever seen before or since. And that led to some incredible opportunities, which we can, talk about later in the podcast. But, from Merrill Lynch's world headquarters in New York, 4 million square foot lease. Think about that from a guy in Los Angeles doing that. The Drexel Burnham Lambert, Unique House headquarters. A great example of this was we ended up, when I got there, working for Bao Shalom in Rochester, New York. How John was on a boat trip with his wife. It was rained out to go fishing in Alaska. And he sat at a card table with another person and his wife, who happened to be the CEO of Bao Shalom. Lo and behold, 7 days later, he's like, "We gotta go to New York. We're gonna work on Bausch& Lomb's headquarters." So he found a way to connect the dots and sell that person on how he had some magic to help him. So I think it's work ethic, I think it's connecting the dots, and then thirdly, he really did surround himself with really great supporting actors, right? I mean, it's great to be him, but he needs a whole bunch of people to implement that. And this is not to, talk about myself, but he always had an assistant that he had two secretaries. He always had a third person who was an ex-lawyer. And then he surrounded himself with a bunch of accountants and developers. So no matter what the problem was, there was somebody internally that would help create a solution that was, smarter than him. As he would say, he was never the master of anything other than creating the business and the relationships, right? So he was always thought of himself as being inch deep and a mile wide and surrounding himself with people that were
Mhm.
an inch wide and a mile deep. And that combination was really successful.
Did you ever practice law, or did you go straight from law school
No,
into
I
real estate?
did leave. They thought I was going to stay at Cushman Realty, but I got to work for the government in Washington, D.C. So I was one of either 10 or 12 people that got to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission in the late 1980s, which at the time was a very exciting time to be. People don't remember Michael Milken was being indicted by the
Mhm.
SEC in the late 80s.
Yep.
So it was a
Mhm.
very active part of the government, an exciting opportunity, which I didn't really want to pass. And so I did that for a short period of time before coming back to Los Angeles.
So then you go back to LA, and is that where you started your commercial real estate, career officially?
Well, I mean, I worked part time, so that was official. But yes, as a full time employee, that was my first job in commercial real estate, was going back to work for John Cushman, not as a broker, by the way, but as a salaried financial analyst consultant. Because again, as
Mhm.
I told you, John had a pretty big supporting cast. So there was 5 people in that group. And that was my entree back to commercial real estate on a full time basis.
When did you start developing your own book of business and clients, and how did you do that?
That was, I would say, maybe 3 years later after working in Los Angeles. This is more of a personal side story. That was a tumultuous time to be in LA. That was after the Rodney King riots. And my wife and I just had a newborn and we're trying to figure out what we were going to do. And coincidentally, at that time, company was going to open an office in the Bay Area, and so I looked at that as an opportunity to move there. My wife worked at Arthur Anderson in the Bay Area before she went to MBA school at USC, which is where we met. And so and we got married in Napa Valley. So we liked the Bay Area, even though I never lived there. And this was an opportunity to get out of being the salaried person to becoming a broker. So it was a big leap of faith, right? We had no family, we had really no money, we had no real clients, and so there was a great person, Chip Weiser, who started the company up there. And he was really, again, like my next mentor to really help coach me
Mhm.
how to get up there and to start working as a broker.
And what did he tell you to do?
Well, it was a lot of hard work. And I should also say one of your former colleagues, Tom Maloney, was there. So it was
Mhm.
Chip Weiser with Tom Maloney and Roger Gage, and I was the fourth of the Musketeers. But those guys all had real experience. All I had was consulting experience. But it was really an opportunity to get out and meet people and take those skills that I had in LA and then try to translate them to the Bay Area. If you think about at that time, there's a lot of white space, right? There wasn't a lot of tenant rep brokers. This was in East
Mhm.
Bay. And so the competition wasn't as fierce as it was today. So getting meetings was a little bit easier. And truth be told, I did a really, I think, good job of doing internal marketing because we had a lot of clients around the country, but we didn't have a Bay Area office. So it was really easy to try to talk to the other successful brokers within Cushman Realty and suggest, oh, did you know Jacobs Engineering has a location here? We should call them to talk about that since we now have humans to
Mhm.
execute. And so the combination of cold calling and internally trying to mine the existing client base, those two came together.
30 years is a long time. You've seen brokers come and go, and you've seen a lot of folks, um, you know, kinda get stuck at the mid-level. I'm always curious about what separates the top brokers versus the mighty middle. And every real estate firm needs both, right?
For
But
sure.
the real rainmakers, what's unique about them? What do they have?
That's a good question. And I'm going to think about this as I talk, but I think there's, like most recipes, there's a lot of ingredients that come together. One of them might be just sheer luck, right? So there's some people that represent a company and the company just grows and they're growing with them, right? So they're smart enough not to lose the customer. But a lot of that wasn't due to their, own personal success. They were just along for the ride, and I've seen that. But I think the people that consistently get to the top and stay at the top, it's really about trying to deliver the highest level of service and constantly reinventing yourself and trying to get better. And this is one of the things, again, I found from John Cushman and other successful brokers at Cushman Realty was they never rested on their laurels. John would be the first person when a cell phone came out to get a cell phone. He was the first person to get a BlackBerry. He was constantly trying to think about, if I'm at this level, how do I get better and get to the next level, right? And maybe one of the analogies for those that watched the Michael Jordan special was he was a great player, but he never could finish it off, right? And he started getting beat up by the Detroit Pistons, right? So he went to the weight room, he reinvented himself and got better, which is hard to think. How could Michael Jordan get better? But he did. And then he became more successful. And obviously they won
Mhm.
six championships. And I think that's the same attitude that athletes have that are at a very high level is to continue to get better all the time. And I think that's the ingredient, whether it's, within my organization or other organizations. I always look up to people that are trying to find a way to increase their skill set, increase their ability to communicate and adjust with the times and reinvent themselves. As soon as you get lazy, that's the first sign of you're at the end of your road.
When young people come to you, when new brokers in your office come to you and say, "Mark, what do I do? What advice do you have for me?" What do you tell them?
Well, the first thing I tell the young people, which is, and I don't mean this to be overly pejorative, but you should be the first person in and the last person out. The younger generation work ethic, it's not quite the same as our generation or the John Cushman generation.
Mhm.
So working harder is a really big part of it. Number two, I tell them at the end of the day, you're in the real estate business, and most people just don't know real estate. So if you haven't walked in every single building and had an opportunity to be able to talk about it, how are you going to be able to communicate to a customer if they say, "What do you think about 123 Main Street?" The answer can't be, "I've never been to 123 Main Street." So you've got to learn your craft, and that takes a lot of time, and that's part of getting in early, leaving late. And then thirdly, it's still a people business, right? So you have to become authentically yourself that somebody wants to communicate with because you could be the smartest guy about 123 Main Street, but if you're abrasive personality or you're too shy or you're not likable, at the end of the day, people will find that information somewhere else. They've got to really like and trust you for you to be successful. And those are easy things to say, but hard to do, and they take a long time.
Over the course of your career in San Francisco in particular, has there been any other city that has seen more booms and busts? 3 big ones, right?
Yeah, I haven't worked in places like Houston, but with the oil fluctuation, I think they probably have similar challenges that
Mhm.
that we have here. And honestly, I think it's getting more boom and bust every year. When I came here, and I just had this conversation with a young person in the 1990s. You think about, and when we had big oil companies, Chevron's headquarters was here, gone, right? Still have the Gap. Charles Schwab, was a young company, but growing company. They're gone. Bank of America's headquarters, and they had 2.5 million feet. They're down to 500,000. It used to be considered actually a very old and staid location, right? A very miniature version of New York was what San Francisco was with, nearly at that time 700,000 people. It has
Mhm.
evolved to become this, technology juggernaut that has these much wilder fluctuations up and down. So it's been quite a change over the last 30 years from when I moved here to where it is today, and where I think it's going is even more volatile.
Me about, um, AI and the San Francisco market. AI is supposed to take away all the office jobs, right? But isn't it true that the AI companies are the ones that are filling up the empty office buildings in San Francisco?
Yeah, the answer is who knows if he'll take away jobs, right? That remains to be seen. Are
Uh-huh.
they? Yes, leasing lots of space. They certainly are. I mean, it's certainly the driver and could be the savior for the San Francisco economy. But I don't know if it's any different than software as a service, right? When Salesforce came in, they went from 0 to 3 million feet. and now they're back down to 700,000 feet. So the longevity of these things is very fragile. And that's why I'm saying the beta is going to be, it's going to be a higher beta market over time. And research and development is a fickle thing. So where that goes, it's hard to tell, but I can just tell you when some of the work that we've done for people like Jamestown, we've just signed 30 leases probably in the last 6 to 9 months. And of those 30 leases, probably 25 were AI startups. How many of those will have longevity? I don't know, but clearly there's going to be winners and losers for sure. And it's a super exciting time to be here. And we're going to ride the wave until it crashes into the shore. And then we'll kind of go back out and paddle for the next wave. And we've seen that with hardware companies, then software companies, software as a service. And now we're seeing it with AI. And whatever the next cycle is going to be, I'm sure it will happen in San Francisco because we have Stanford, we have Cal, and we have money. And that combination produces lots of people with great ideas, and they need to find a way to develop them, and it takes humans to develop.
How do you think AI is changing our business? How are you using AI?
We're in the very early stages of that, and everybody talks about how it's going to change what we do. I'd say today it's changed absolutely nothing, to be perfectly honest. Having said that, I was fiddling around this weekend with a company called Base 44, and I was developing an app that could then take information and create email output to then try to do business development. And it was amazing in prompting it and creating an app. It took me all of 10 minutes. So I think the future is going to be changed dramatically. Now, at the end of the day, it's still a people business. People sign
Mhm.
leases. AI doesn't sign leases. And people tour spaces and people make decisions about they want a view, they want a cheap deal, they want parking, they want a location. So I think it will help us become better practitioners. And this is back to what I was talking about with my John Cushman story. How do you get to be an early adopter and make this a better version of yourself? It's not going to replace what you and I do, but it could has the potential to make us do it quicker and arguably a little bit better. And that's exciting.
How does your legal training help you in our business?
I thought that was going to be a panacea that would lead me to great riches and easy answers. And so it has never really quite panned out that way. But having said that, I do think it has served me well in terms of being able to be a better communicator, right? So writing is a lot of what we do. And then obviously we get lease documents, which are very long, and everybody's relying upon attorneys. So I don't want to suggest that we're here to replace anybody. But I do find being able to read leases well and to be able to help communicate and bridge the gap between what the attorneys are saying and what the business people has given me a unique ability to add value along the way. Once in a great while, it does produce some unexpected outcomes and just a crazy story, but I won't name the firm. But there was a law firm in LA back in the day when I was not a broker working for a senior guy, and this law firm wanted to expand by like 5,000 feet. So let's say they have 50,000 feet, hands me the lease. And I said to him, "Hey, do you know that buried somewhere in this lease is a right to terminate that neither the broker nor the tenant knew that they had, but being a good reader of leases produced an outcome where they renegotiated their lease, a great outcome for the customer, great outcome for the broker. And so once in a blue moon, you get that pot of gold. But more often than not, it's really being a good steward between the legal people and the business people and bringing those parties together and trying to help them understand like what the relevance is or why would this potentially.
I've always encouraged young brokers to read every word in a lease and and learn all of the intricacies of non-disturbance agreements and default provisions and all the stuff that puts most people to sleep. I think that's one of the things that's critical in ultimately becoming a great broker. I'm curious, brokers nowadays, on the office side anyway, one dimensional. Don't say that in a bad way, but they're either tenant rep or their agency. Not all, but I would say most. You're working on both sides with name brand companies and law firms and banks and developers. Tell me about that.
Well, again, I think this is something that stemmed back to my upbringing at Cushman Realty. Most people there did both. And even John, for all of the success he has at tenant rep broker, and he represented McGuire Thomas and doing Wells Fargo Center, Library Tower. And so it just became something that I felt at ease with. But for the landlord listings, I don't take listings unless they have problem solving issues. If it just has 5,000 feet of vacant space, there's probably people that can do it more efficiently than me. Whereas if you're looking at something like Library Tower, where you're trying to find a way, how do I market this building to a tenant? Having the tenant mindset, I think, can make you a better landlord broker. And in instances, having some landlord experience can make the tenant broker oftentimes more successful. It's easy to get stuck into it's my way or the highway. Like I'm always right. And when you serve both sides and represented clients on both sides, I think it oftentimes allows you to find some middle ground because middle ground is where 99% of the deals are made. They're never one or the other. It's always some compromise and understanding why something might be important to a landlord is super important if you're a tenant rep broker and vice versa. So I've embraced that and tried to find opportunities where I can add value in both sides of the equation.
Can you tell me about a deal that you're particularly proud of and how come?
Well, there's been a lot of deals over the course of time of all different sizes, and so I could go on for a long time. But now that you asked me the question, one thing jumped into my head right away, and this was going back, boy, I say 20 years ago when we were just at the infant stage of working with Wells Fargo Bank in San Francisco. And we ended up leasing some space at 455 Market Street. Wells Fargo was never leasing the highest end buildings, right? They're always Class A buildings, but more in the
Mhm.
middle of the road. And they were looking for a big chunk of space. The market was fairly tight. And one of the tenants in there, Hartford Insurance, was moving out. And so we arranged what seemed like a complicated deal at the time. In hindsight, probably wasn't that complicated, but getting them to buy out a lease, doing a new lease with Wells Fargo Bank. And at the time, the bank's philosophy was to do short term deals because they didn't know where the business was going. And that was just the way they grew up. And I pitched the person at the time, Dave Nelson, who ran real estate, uh, about why don't we do something bigger in the long term, like in New York, they're doing 15, 20-year deals and probably the same thing in DC. So we ended up doing a 15-year deal. So it was way outside the norm with some rights to expand, some rights to terminate. And it allowed them to control the space for a long period of time. And as the market became more volatile, as we talked about, and we had these spikes in the market,
Mhm.
they fixed the rate at a very low rate, which ended up being half of what the next peak cycle was. It was something that was out of the ordinary. It wasn't something they were doing, but it was really collaborative with the corporate real estate department. So it was my idea. They embraced it, we modified it, implemented it, and then subsequently did it on a whole bunch of other deals around San Francisco. So if I could have patented it, I probably would have been doing a little bit better, but we did pretty well on that.
Tell me about the team that you work with.
It's always a team effort, and that's ebbed and flowed over the year. But really, the idea is to have and Melinda Todd is a broker coordinator, and then over course of time, add some junior partners that serve as an opportunity to leverage my time more effectively, right? Because there's the people component dealing with the managing partner of a firm or the CEO or whatever the case may be. And there's some work behind the scenes, right? Because you need some financial analysts to take the proposals, put them together, summarize them, and financially compare them. And so I think about at any given time, we have anywhere between 3 and 5 people working on deals at different parts of it. And so part of my day over time has grown to be more about coordinating the people and making sure things are getting done, as well as trying to maintain that human element with the decision making.
Tell me about the team on the home front. Tell me about your family.
I've been married for, will be 37 years this year, which is the reason I left Washington, D.C., because I got engaged before I left, when my wife was at USC at MBA school, that's where we met. And that's when we moved back to LA. And then, had our daughter who'll be 36 in a couple of weeks, which is exciting. She's an executive at Nike up in Oregon, so up in Portland. And then I have a son who just turned 29, who's the budding CEO of a hair care products company with his partner down in Los Angeles, the Beverly Hills area. So he's a famous hairstylist to a lot of the movie stars, like Jennifer Aniston as an example. And so they're building a business that can be found at Sephora or www.chrismcmillan.com for a shameless plug for those looking for hair care products.
All right. What are your hobbies?
That's ebbed and flowed over time, but today I would say golf is my biggest passion. So I kind of aged out of so many other things. I used to be a very big runner, and I used to actually do a lot of running events here in the Bay Area, including Beta Breakers, which just happened. And I remember being so excited back in the day. If you were in the first 10,000 out of 100,000, you get your name published in the paper, and that was really exciting to do that. We're very big in hiking as a family. So for my wife's birthday a few years ago, we went to Mount Everest up to the base camp. And my wife's now
Mm.
on the Camino de Santiago, but we hiked all over Europe. Do a little bit of skiing here and there. Used to be a super passionate mountain biker. We lived in Walnut Creek. My backyard was 100,000 acres of open space. But when we moved to Oakland, that became a little bit more of a challenge. So now that we live in Burlingame, I'm looking to reignite that passion again. Staying outdoors is a really important part of me as a person and us as a family.
How much business do you do on the golf course?
Not as much as I liked, shockingly. I thought that would be one of the reasons I got into it. I had a very bad mountain biking accident. So my wife's like, you can't mountain bike anymore. And so I'm like, okay, I'll take up golf. Like all the guys are golfing, and that's where they're doing all these deals. Turns out that's probably not as true as some people think, but I'm still trying to do it. But they do have a lot of clients that do like to golf. I think it's a great way to maintain a relationship. I'm not so sure it's going to win you anything at the end of the day, unless you're a member of Augusta National. That might be a different category. But for us mere mortals at the Olympic Club, it's a great way to meet people, but most importantly, if you have a relationship and somebody likes to golf, it's an awesome way to continue that relationship, and having 4 hours of one-on-one time with somebody is a real special opportunity.
Are there any organizations where you spend the most time giving back, either your time or your treasure?
I've done a whole bunch of different things, and they've ranged from I lived at Walnut Creek. I'm very passionate about the East Bay Regional Parks and got involved in the foundation, ultimately became the president of that. And that was great to give back and to see every single day the work that you're doing being put to use. So that was super great. I got re-engaged with USC when my kids got a little bit older, both who went to USC. I was involved in the parents organization, and my wife and I started a scholarship for kids in Northern California to go to USC that weren't financially able to do it. And that was super exciting. I'm involved in Cornet, and so that's something I'm very passionate about and I'm currently doing. And then you mentioned early on about UC Berkeley, so I've been involved with the Fisher Center for Real Estate, and that led me to be and given an opportunity to teach at UC Berkeley, and that was really a tremendous way to give back to the real estate community, to get me outside my comfort zone, try different things. And so those are the areas of focus I spend most of my time.
Tell me more about what you're teaching at Berkeley.
It's called
Tell me about your syllabus, Professor McGranahan.
Yeah, it's a very introductory class of GGBA 180, Introduction to Real Estate. So we have kids that are actually students. We have a lot of other kids they've had psychology majors, engineering majors, architecture majors. I've had football players, athletes. And so the real goal is to hopefully get people to really understand real estate. And I start off the class with a kind of a overall flashing pictures on the screen, starting from the Middle Ages. Real estate existed forever. Everybody lived in a cave. That's real estate, right? To what we get to today. And there's office, industrial, retail, data centers. there's property management, there's brokerage, there's owners, there's appraisers. So the ecosystem is so big, there's an opportunity for everybody, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, whether you want to be on the landlord side or the tenant side. So just exposing them is really important. And I think at the end of the day, is giving them skills so they know how to use Excel or an HP 12C. They understand the concept of discounted cash flow. Because ultimately, what we try to tell them is real estate is just an investment class, right? You can invest in bonds, you can invest in stocks, you can invest in venture capital, private equity, or real estate, or anything for that matter. And if you're able to put it all into an Excel, you'll know that you have cost at the front end, negative number, some positive numbers, hopefully on the back end, and they might be in the form of cash flow and then some residual value. And if you do a discounted cash flow, you know whether it's positive or negative, or you can do an IRR. And if you can take those skill sets with you for the next 30, 40 years, no matter where you are, whether it's real estate or elsewhere, you'll have something that's of value. And I think we've done a really good job in doing that.
That's gotta be a lot of fun for you.
Yeah, it's a lot of hard
Okay.
work, much harder than I thought it would be, to be honest.
How much time do you end up spending preparing for the classes and then actually teaching?
Well, it was obviously the front end, it was a lot harder, and then it's gotten easier over time. But remember, part of this was during COVID. It started in person, went to online, started online, went back to in person. So things kept changing over time. And then you realize some things worked and didn't work. So at the end of the day, it's still 10 to 15 hours a week. It's a lot of work.
Are you a tough grader?
I would say the answer is kind of. I co-teach with somebody else. We always tell people if you earn a grade, we're going to give it to you. And there's hyper grade inflation. It's a whole nother subject. But I think we're tough in the sense that most people are relying upon AI and the internet. Our final is handwritten with a blue book. No computer, just you and your pencil. You can't articulate and answer the questions. You're just not going to do well. And you cannot use a computer. You can't make it open book.
You can't even bring in your HP 12C?
No. I taught people the HP 12C the first year, and then it just went by the way of the dodo bird. Nobody would buy one. Nobody would use it. I would do it all the time in class. We would do practice problems and they're doing in Excel. And I'd just like, dude, like, here's the answer. And then they'd figure out a minute or two later using Excel. It's crazy that people somehow abandon the idea of using a handheld calculator.
It is. I probably have 4 of those things,
Me too.
lying around
Yeah.
at
You're
different
the
desks
best.
and so forth. Yeah. Oh, they're great. The lightning round. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure. Let me stand up straighter.
Here we go. Are you an early riser or are you a night owl?
Early riser.
Besides San Francisco, what is your favorite commercial real estate market?
I would say New York City.
Coffee or cocktails?
Well, you're gonna hate this. I don't drink coffee and I don't drink cocktails. I'll go with wine. I'm a wine
Well,
girl.
you're in the Bay Area. One word to describe today's market in San Francisco.
Volatile.
Favorite app on your cell phone?
I'm gonna say the Wall Street Journal because I use public transit a lot, and so I tried to catch up on my reading, and I think I use that app more than anybody else, more than any other app.
Good. Okay, so to the extent that people refer to you as a great broker, and I certainly think they oughta. What do you hope they mean when someone says, "Mark, man, he's a great broker"?
Well, I think the thing that I do like the most in terms of nice things that have been said to me over time is about being thorough, fair, good listener, willing to accept other people's thoughts and opinions before just jumping to a conclusion. And I think that's just again back to my training of the people that I admired most in the business, where this is the way it has to be kind of answer. Again, at the end of the day, most deals are two people coming together. And if you're not a good listener and you're not thinking about the other person's side, I don't think you can do your job as effectively. So those are the things I pride myself the most on.
Mark, thank you so much for appearing on this show. Hope you've had fun.
Yeah, thank you
You've
for
had some
having me. What a
great
blast.
answers. Yeah, hopefully it's everything I promised.
Yes, the compensation especially.
Exactly. All right. Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks for listening to the Great Broker Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, follow the show and share it with someone who wants to become a great broker. See you next time.